Happy Sunday, everybody. Carlos here. So, depending on what time you end up catching this, I'm actually recording this on a Sunday night, so it still qualifies as a Sunday Randoms video. I promised I wanted to put one together, and I finally got a chance to sit down after a long day and put something together here for you. I thought I'd talk about a couple of things tonight, but first of all, before I even get anything else, I just wanted to pay a little ode to an old backdrop that I used for some videos, mostly last fall and a little bit into the winter. The lovely Lambeau Field in the background, and I've even got a Packers coaster that I've got for my drink. But I don't know if I've ever shown, I'm pretty sure I have in a couple of videos, but my lovely background comes via Canton, Ohio, where I picked up this lovely Green Bay Packers panoramic puzzle. I've never actually tried to even attempt to put together the puzzle. It's still closed up. At some point I may take a stab at it, but I've got to find enough table space. But I kind of enjoyed having it as a little background for my cards as kind of a fun way, so I thought I'd bring it back. So first of all, I wanted to thank those of you who might be here for the first time, thanks to a shout out that was given by Eric, ThoseBackPages. So I'll put a link in the description to the channel if for some reason you're unfamiliar. For those of you that are new, welcome. And Eric, thank you very much again for the shout out, so cheers to you. For those of you that do come from that, you might wonder why somebody that you probably never heard of has so many subscribers. Well, I talk a little bit about that in my 1,000 subscriber video. I'll put a little link into the eye thing in the corner if you want to check that out separately later on. But I thought what I'd talk about tonight a little bit is, I did mention in that video kind of the background of the channel itself and kind of the ups and downs and the way the channel ended up the way it is right now. But one thing I didn't mention was kind of, now that I am doing a more sports card centric channel talking about my hobbies from that perspective, who the heck is this guy? How long has he been in the game, and where'd he come from? So I thought I'd talk about that a little bit tonight. So for me, it actually started in the early 90s. That was when I actually started opening up packs with an illustrious and clearly very rare set known as 1991 Donruss. I could literally have grabbed any random card, but I ended up just picking the Andre Dawson because I thought it would be good to at least have a decent player, even if the set is a little debatable. If any of you remember this set, it was produced in somewhat large figures. I'm not completely convinced that they ever turned off the printing press. There might still be more of these floating around somewhere. But when I was growing up, at that time, a lot of the packs that I got were a couple of years older. So I was opening packs of 1989 tops and 1990 tops, even though it wasn't that season anymore. For me, the new packs at the time that we got from the pharmacy was 1991 Donruss in all its glory, both series 1 and 2 with the green and then with the blue backgrounds. Well, actually, I think it was blue first and then green. But anyway, so it was glorious cards like this one that I would end up pulling. But truthfully, I ended up getting a lot of Eddie Murray's for whatever reason. I think at one point I had at least a dozen of them. It was much a surprise to me as anything else. But basically the way my dad would do it is that he'd buy a bunch of the packs. And basically if I did chores or something good, I'd get a pack. And they'd all be sitting at the top of the refrigerator beyond my reach. I knew they were there, but I couldn't get at them. So the easiest way to do it was just to play along and to get my pack. But needless to say, the childhood collection of these didn't quite hold up value-wise. So that's where I got started in the early 90s. And at the time, I was predominantly focusing in on set collecting, much like everybody else. And I would get out of that at some point, but I always stayed consistent. I'm different than a lot of collectors in the sense that I never really stopped collecting. I would have ebbs and flows where I simply wouldn't have as much time, but the collection stayed intact throughout. That's why I still have. This one actually comes from a factory set that I bought years later because I was frustrated that even though I felt like I opened a million packs of it, having 12 Eddie Murrays didn't mean that I had a complete set, so I ended up just spending the $5 and buying a factory set because I refused to allow 1991 Donruss to beat me. With that said, as time went on, I tried to move on to other pursuits and other sets that were interesting to me. 92 Tops was kind of a cool set that I remember opening a fair bit of. 93 Tops, definitely. And 94 Tops as well. But the thing that kind of changed my hobby fortunes a little bit was once I started collecting a little bit of vintage. And that came about as a result of the internet. So we're talking now about the mid-90s. So once I get into the mid-90s, I start seeing different hobby groups. Now, at this point, I'm only in my teens. So really, when I started collecting and I was online checking these things out, I was 13 and 14 years old. So this is 95 and 96. So 95, I was 12, and 96, I was 13. So right around that time. So we had the internet fairly early, and we were playing around with a little bit of it, and I was doing some trades and things online and all that. So I've been at that for a while. But one of the first things that I started to gravitate towards was vintage. And it was mainly because I was interested in the history of baseball. I had always been an avid reader of baseball books, and one of my favorite books to read was one that I think is still in my parents' house, which is just this book of facts from all these different eras going back to the 1800s. And that's how you kind of became accustomed and acclimated to a lot of the old-time players who, were many, many years before you were born. But you could kind of get a sense of seeing different factoids and little stories about them, and that was always fascinating. So from that perspective, it was always interesting. And to me, the design of a lot of these sets, so this is the 1956 Topps early win. I've got one that is in my set separate from this one. But the fact is, I just love the way the designs were and the perspective that they went. And I think 56 Topps is probably my favorite set. That's why I was very happy that I was able to finish it. I think last year or the year before. In any event, once I started collecting vintage a little bit, I didn't really have the budget to play in the big cards. So for me, the Mantles and the Mays and Hank Aaron's and all that were way out of reach. Now, later on, that wouldn't be the case anymore, but at the time, it was something to aspire to, something aspirational. And I still collect vintage to this day, even though it's become a lot more focused. That led me down different paths of collecting. So it wasn't just about trying to build sets necessarily, but it was about looking at different vintage sets, trying to get different cards from it. And as time went on, I would start to build some vintage sets, but it didn't start off necessarily that way. It was more aspirational than anything else. It was just trying to get some of these vintage cards where I could. One of my favorite things about the late 90s and the early 2000s was that we had a card shop in Toronto called Legends of the Game. And one of the things was that I kind of made it my niche to look for the more beat up examples of a lot of these cards. And Legends of the Game, their thing was that they would buy collections. But the truth is, they never really paid very close attention to a lot of their vintage cards if they weren't in nice condition. So if it wasn't Mickey Mantle, if it wasn't somebody that was obvious, Hank Aaron, Harmon Killebrew, Sandy Koufax, Roberto Clemente, if it wasn't somebody they could find in the guide, they wouldn't pay too much attention to it. And if it was a lower condition card, even less. So at that card shop, again, hindsight being 2020, I kind of wish that I had had the budget to be able to go in and just buy out a lot of what they had. I bought 1952 Topps high numbers at that time for $1 Canadian. So you can imagine that translated into US dollars, probably about 67, 70 cents now. Well, those beat up cards actually created the basis of a lot of the sets that I ended up building. So I finished the 1955 Bowman set in the last year, and a lot of those cards, including star cards and semi-stars that weren't necessarily the Mantles and the Mays, a lot of those actually came from that stash that I got at Legends of the Game at that time, and I was paying $1 or $2 per card, which was really kind of fun for me because, to me, I knew that the Brooklyn Dodgers and Yankees cards were worth a little bit more, and I knew that the high numbers were worth a little bit more for different sets that I was going after. So just having that little bit of knowledge, they just didn't take the time to look into it. And that's kind of a thing that you could do at the time as a collector. The internet was out there, but it wasn't something that everybody referred to. It wasn't like everybody went on eBay, even though eBay was there. It wasn't like everybody went on eBay and looked these things up. So if you were willing to put in that little bit of extra effort, you could really take advantage and be there. Unfortunately, I didn't get to take advantage of it as much as I probably would have wanted to. My collection would have been even further along, but it was still a step in the direction that would lead me to where I am now. Moving forward a little bit more, I would eventually get into player collecting. So for me, it started off collecting Joe Carter cards and then eventually to Mike Modano cards. And the truth is that I still collect Mike Modano cards to this day. The Joe Carter collection still exists, but it's kind of gone by the wayside. But I've moved on to collecting other players and other projects. But Modano has stayed a constant for me. I don't have one of my Modano cards within arm's reach right now, but I'll use a couple of other player collections that I'm kind of starting up to illustrate the example. So I am in the Toronto area, even though I'm not in Toronto per se, but I am a longtime Jays fan. So for me, looking at the Jays are a very interesting franchise to me, and I won't go too far on a tangent. But the Jays are an interesting franchise to me because when I was growing up, and we're talking the early 90s, so in 1991 was the first time I got to go to a Jays game. And at that time, you basically had to work hard to get a ticket because at that point they were selling out every game, 50,000 a night. And the team was just on the ascend because by the late 80s and the early 90s, they were perennial contenders. They had been division champions a couple of times, and they had gotten there. Like in 91, they lost to Minnesota, who won the World Series. And then, in the 90s, they lost to one of the Oakland A's teams that went to the World Series. And they were always on the cusp. They were right there. But they never could quite get over the hump. And it was in 92 when I was 9 and 93 when I was 10 when they won the back-to-back World Series. And it's one of those things that's really interesting about my fandom with the Jays over the years is that when I was 9 years old, they won the World Series. When I was 10 years old, they won the World Series. And then I would not see them play another playoff game, let alone a World Series game, a playoff game, until 2015. in that time, I had finished elementary school, finished high school, finished university, gone to work, and I was 32 years old when they finally made the playoffs again. I never thought, my 10-year-old self, I'm sure, could never have pictured that it would be 22 years between the time that I would see them win the World Series and the time that I would see them even play a playoff game again. So that kind of is why I think the 2015 team kind of holds a warm spot in my heart, because that was about it. And it was a 2-year window of playoff appearances, and now we're pinning our hopes on this young guy here. I'm not 100% sure what to make of him, but he is a representative of the current generation. Unfortunately, Carlos Delgado kind of represents the lost generation, where he actually, I believe he actually got a ring for being part of the 93 team technically, because he did play part of that series. Carlos Delgado was the bridge guy between the World Series championship years and then the more modern era, where it just wasn't happening. There were no playoff appearances, and they had Carlos Delgado in his prime, who was a monster. I'm going to talk more about Carlos Delgado and Vladimir Guerrero to a lesser degree, but Carlos Delgado mainly. I'm going to talk more about that in a little video series I'm going to start up in the next little bit. I mentioned in my pickups video that I was inspired by a couple of the things that I saw there to create a video explaining kind of my philosophy and how I do the player collections. So I kind of want to start up. I've already kind of been doing a little bit of a collection of Carlos Delgado cards anyway, but I wanted to kind of formalize it and then kind of explain my thought process on them, because the player collection that I'm going to do for these guys, because I want to start picking up some more Vladimir Guerrero Jr. cards. The process that I'm going to take for these two guys is completely different. The Carlos Delgado has already had a full career, and 5,000 cards are already out there. But Vladimir Guerrero Jr. already, even though he just got started, he already has 1,600 cards out there, which is obscene if you really think about it. So the approach that I'm going to take to these two collections is completely different, and I'm going to talk about that in that video. But as far as player collecting, it's really become my bread and butter. Outside of vintage, which I still do, and I still enjoy, because and I'll talk about it more at some point later on, but I enjoy it because I like the challenge of it, and I enjoy that there is almost a scholarship element to it, because you can really think about and decide what sets you want to do, and decide if you want to include variations in it, because a lot of those vintage sets have them, and you can definitely do that, and you can make it into almost anything you want it to be. But in the same vein, player collecting can almost be anything you want it to be. I'll talk about it more in that video, but if you think about it, you could collect almost any version you want. You can try to collect every card for both of these players. You could try to collect just the rookie cards. Well, for Delgado, that'd be kind of easy. The 92 Bowman, you know, this is a shiny version of a card that could have been the 92 Bowman. He never had an autograph rookie, but there you go. If he had an autograph rookie, that's basically what it would have looked like. And by the way, I still think that mustache was a mistake. I think his early cards reflect that. But you can collect basically almost any theme that you want with these player collections. In addition to, if you just want to try it for everything, then you go ahead. If you want to get just memorabilia cards, go ahead. Just autograph cards, you can do that too. You can limit yourself. So for Delgado, my preference would always be to get ones with him in a Blue Jay uniform. But that doesn't mean that I necessarily have to exclude New York Mets or even his cup of coffee with the Florida Marlins. All of that can be part of it in different combinations in almost any way you want to do it. The real rule is that there are no rules, which differs a lot from set collecting, which is a flexibility that I always enjoyed. Set collecting, you can do certain things. You can decide to include or exclude certain cards, and I always thought that was kind of cool. But the reality is, if the set's 100 cards and you want to consider yourself complete the set and it's 100 cards, you have to collect 1 to 100. You can't just decide to skip 97 just because. Well, you could, but it wouldn't really be a complete set, because the set's numbered and you know exactly what you're trying to do, presumably. Without going too far into it, the short version is I reached a point where now in my current collecting, it's a lot about the player collections that I build. It's a lot about the vintage sets that I'm still working on. I had the kind of going back into why I put so much emphasis on the vintage at the time. I had it in my mind, this long-term goal. I wanted to try to do a complete run of all the Topps and all the Bowman sets. And the thing is, as I got older, I realized, you know what? I really like the history of the Topps company, and I like a lot of the sets that are in it, and I'm still going to collect a bunch of those sets. But the truth is, I don't really like all the sets in that run. So what I ended up doing, where I got to, is I finished the 1979 Topps. I finished the 77 Topps. 76 Topps is done. 75 Topps is about 20 cards away from completion. It'll get done. 74 Topps is done. 70 Topps, I basically need a little over 100 cards, mostly high numbers. So I have most of the run in the 1970s. 1978 Topps, I could probably just buy as a set and get it over with. So I might finish the 70s run, but even the 1970s created kind of what I was talking about. I really don't like the 1972 Topps set. I know it's supposed to be psychedelic and everything. I've never been a fan of it. 71 I like just because those black borders are tough. but I think they had some really classic cards in them, and it's a tough set. 70 Topps, even though it's kind of plain, I always kind of enjoyed it for what it is. For some reason, it just worked for me. The fact that this year they did Topps Heritage on it was kind of fun, but I've always enjoyed it. 69 Topps, 67 Topps with like these large, almost full screenshots. There are some great classic Topps sets, but my favorite Topps set of all, other than 56, is 53 Topps. And also, to be honest, I prefer a lot of the Bowman sets of the 1950s. So if I was going to do a run, I would probably be more in favor of doing 48 to 55 Bowman. I already have 55 Bowman done. 54 Bowman, I'm about 30 or 40 away. So that I'm going to try to get done. And I really want to take a stab at doing 53 Topps color, especially. So I think I kind of have a path as far as vintage is concerned. That's kind of where I'm thinking at. But it's the constant change. I think maybe my overarching theme, if there is one, and I'm kind of rambling at this point, so humor me, and I thank you if you're actually still listening. My overarching theme is that your goals and the direction you go changes. And what I've really come to appreciate in recent times is taking a more focused approach rather than trying to do everything at once, which is what I was doing originally. I was accumulating cards from all these sets because I was trying to do this complete run. And at the same time, I was trying to collect some of my players and all that. And it was diverting my resources in too many directions. And resources isn't just money. It's also time. It's also effort. It takes a lot of work to find some of these cards. And building these sets is tough. Any of you that have built a lot of these sets, you know. Especially if you're going to try to put any kind of standard on it. I was basically willing to take any card just to fill the hole in the binder, which is fine. But in the end, it wasn't very satisfying. And that's kind of what led me down the path of, you know what? I kind of just want to collect what I want to collect. And maybe that's the thing that I'll take away for this video. In the end, I've had the chance to play around with all kinds of different versions of collecting. And in the end, I decided that what should have been obvious in the first place, but I guess wasn't. I just want to collect what I want to collect. I want to collect what gets me excited, what I have fun with. So it means maybe I'm never going to have that complete run, but I could have some awesome sets. I could live with having a complete 56 Topps set and a couple of more top sets from the 50s and having a complete Bowman run. Not easy. There's that Mantle rookie out there. There's that Mays rookie out there. There's some major high-end rookie cards out there, but it's not the end of the world. If I want to do it badly enough, it's possible. And things like that are possible. And collecting players, Vladimir Guerrero Jr. is on the rise as far as hobby popularity. And Carlos Delgado is a little bit on the neglected side. So both of these guys are kind of on opposite ends of the spectrum. But it doesn't mean they can't be part of the collection. And stuff like that is kind of what makes the hobby fun. So hopefully my blathering gave you a little bit more of a background of kind of where I come at it from the hobby standpoint. I'm not really new to it. There are people that have been collecting longer than I have. But I've been at it for a little while, and I've been on this internet collecting thing for a little while. Even though from the perspective of YouTube, sports cards, I'm kind of new there. I only really started focusing the channel on sports cards this past fall, but I'm having fun with it. And making the videos that I want to make about the topics that I want to make them for. So hopefully people enjoy that. And if they do, that's awesome. And if they don't, that's fair. But either way, I'll keep kind of doing what I'm doing, and I'll always welcome feedback, any positive or negative, as far as what's going on, because I want to make the channel better and I want to make it enjoyable for someone that's watching. And some of the videos are always going to be just me keeping kind of my own tally of what I'm doing. But at the same time, some of the other ones are going to be what I'm going to try to share, what information that I do have. I've been collecting players' collections long enough that I think I've got a couple of things I can contribute if someone hasn't done it before. So that's kind of what I'm going to do. That'll be a little video series I'm going to put together. I don't know how many episodes it's going to be. I'll kind of wing it. It'll be also kind of a way of tracking how I'm doing because, as I said, I'm going to take two very different approaches to these player collections, different from other ones that I've done in the past, but I will refer to some of those other ones kind of as lessons learned because I've definitely learned I made a few mistakes and spent a lot of money on things that I probably shouldn't have spent the money on. But anyway, thanks very much if you've listened to the end of the video. I appreciate it. I'll be back for another Sunday random video. I don't know if it'll be this Sunday or the following Sunday. Work's getting a little busy. But I will be back for another video sooner or later. And as always, thanks very much for watching, and we'll catch you in the next one.